Welcome to the Chicago Football Connection podcast. I'm your host, Steve Letizia. You can follow me on Twitter at CFC Bears. Second podcast this week, as I promised. I got a special guest this time around. It's not just me talking at you. I have Brendan Sugrue, assistant editor at for the Bears Wire. You also probably know him from co-hosting of the excellent Bear Down Chicago podcast. And also make sure to follow him on Twitter at Brendan Sugrue. Brendan, how you doing?
What's up, Steve? I'm good. How are you doing? It's been a busy
Yeah,
day.
pretty good. It's been a very busy day. I'm glad you brought that up because when I messaged you, I was planning on just doing a very, basic training camp podcast. What are we looking at forward to watch in the preseason game? And then Roquan Smith dropped this bomb on us this morning. So at least we won't run out of stuff to talk about because that's definitely been the talk of Bears Twitter all day. And I guess we'll just get right into it because that's the first thing I kind of wanted to talk about. So, I've been on Twitter all day, been trying to find, but Twitter's been pretty popping off. So I'm not exactly sure where you landed on all this. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on Roquan Smith and kind of what your take is.
Yeah, Twitter's definitely been popping off. And I think I purposely just didn't give like any hot takes or anything because literally everybody had one.
Right.
When I saw it pop up this morning, I pretty much just said, oh, blank this. Like, come on, this is not how I want to start my morning.
Yeah.
And then I got like kind of nervous and uneasy because this was clearly a well thought out and planned letter, or I guess notes app letter that Roquan Smith did. The timing made perfect sense right before Family Fest, right when the most amount of fans that are going to see this team for the first time all season, we're going to go to Soldier Field. So naturally, that was going to be a topic of conversation. Yeah, I'd say like overall, I'm kind of nervous. I'm not like panicking yet because we have seen all these trade requests come through from previous players, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, kind of Deontay Johnson a little bit. All of those got resolved. The only thing that's making me really nervous is this is a first-time GM and this is a first-time regime, really. And they didn't draft Roquan Smith. They may not value him like some of these other. And granted, I'm not trying to compare him apples to apples, but of course, John Lynch drafted Deebo Samuel. John Schneider drafted DK Metcalf. Those guys, they're kind of tied to him and they've had success. This is a brand new regime trying to find their footing. And now you have arguably your most talented player requesting a trade in a very public manner, who, by the way, doesn't have an agent. There's a lot to unpack. So really, I could go on about this for hours, but there's reports saying he wants north of $20 million a year, could be as much as 22 million. Frankly, I wouldn't pay him that. I don't think he's that good at as a linebacker to be making that much more than Shaquille Leonard and Fred Warner. Those two are the highest paid off the ball linebackers. I think he kind of settles in right around that. But, we've seen this so many times with when contracts are up, who's going to be the guy to break the bank and set the record for the highest contract at that position? It always happens. But just because it always happens or usually happens doesn't mean it should happen with Roquan Smith. So, and I think the biggest thing, I knew this was kind of coming at some point because over the last 2 years, when we've seen him play, and we know he's a hell of a player, but when he has his Pro Bowl snubs and his All Pro snubs, I immediately, as soon as that happened, I was like, that's a check mark for when his contract's going to be up because that's leverage for the Bears. And it's not fair. Yeah, it's not a fair thing, but that's how these negotiations work. And I'm curious as to what you think in terms of like the public manner that this came out in, because like I said, Roquan's representing himself. I'm sure he heard some very tough conversations that an agent can kind of buffer between, but I don't know. Like, I want to hear your thoughts about it. What do you think about it?
Yeah. I mean, we had very similar thought process, especially when it first came out. It was I don't want to deal with this right now. I can't believe, another thing is happening for a first-time GM, as you said. And then, starting to kind of listening and like, I get exactly why Roquan did it. Like you said, day of Family Fest, most eyes on it. And he had currently, before today, at least, had pretty much zero leverage with, he's under contract. The Bears have the franchise tag in their back pocket. The All-Pro thing is not something I thought of, but that's a very good point because teams do use that in contract negotiations. So that was a very good point. So I get why he dropped it today. I get why he's doing it. But from what I heard and what I was reading, it didn't seem like they were too far apart in terms of the contract. The Bears, it sounds like Roquan wants to be in Chicago. Ryan Poles, I love that he held a press conference today, impromptu, and kind of got out ahead of it. And he said, they want to be they want him in Chicago, and they can, who knows? Maybe they're just saying what they need to say. But it did generally sound like both sides wanted to get together and find a solution to this. So and it didn't sound like they were too far off. So I'm not exactly sure why he needed to go to the press. I feel like they could have, worked. He could have just threatened, hey, I'm going to go to the press if you don't kind of meet me in the middle here, and that would have had the same effect. So I do think him not having an agent is a big component from that. I think if he had an agent, this would probably already be resolved, and they'd probably have him signed. But yeah, it's just interesting, kind of how it's playing out.
Yeah, so this was him going to the press, though. He was able to get this out, and everybody ran with it. Real quickly, I will say I'm with you on the Ryan Poles situation. I loved that he addressed it head on. We did not see that from Ryan Pace over the God knows how long, ever since he took over. And while it doesn't mean a ton in the grand scheme of things, because we've seen Phil Emery was always available, but I think that does show that Ryan Poles is serious about this. Otherwise he could have just let it go and just let this kind of simmer and fester. But in terms of the actual contract details, and I hopefully won't butcher this, I'm not like a cap expert or anything, but it sounds like the biggest thing was the Bears wanted to backload the contract and put in these de-escalators, which essentially means they want him he's got to play and be on the field to earn that money. And for an NFL player, that's really, really risky, not only, for any off the field issues, but injury issues. I mean, God, it's the NFL. A one hit can change your career forever. So, and even Ian Rappaport, when he was explaining this, he said that's pretty rare. And that's something I'm sure the NFLPA wouldn't sign off on. It would hurt the overall linebacker market as a whole. Where you don't want to do something like that either. So it sounds like with all of the incentives, he could have possibly been higher, paid more than Leonard and Warner, but he had to hit all of those key figures, unfortunately, to do it, instead of just guaranteeing him the money. So it sounds like they are kind of close-ish on that, on that front. They're just going about it completely different ways. And what I'm think I'm most worried about, not only from Roquan's standpoint, but this is your first big negotiation with trying to negotiate with a big free agent. We already had an issue with Larry Ogunjobi for free agency this last spring with the whole failed physical, and he's looking good in Steelers camp, unfortunately. But now you're starting to set a precedent for how you negotiate with players. And word like that is going to get around the NFL, and people may not want to do business with you if that's kind of going to be how you approach your contracts. So hopefully this doesn't set a precedent. They can get everything figured out, come to the common ground, and we can have Roquan Smith in Chicago for years to come, because like we said, he is a hell of a player.
Right. Yeah, and I totally understand with the de-escalate clauses, why Roquan Smith didn't accept this contract. He absolutely should not have accepted the contract that was offered. But it sounds like the money total is adding up, so it's just kind of figuring out, how to work it. And he should be guaranteed that money. He shouldn't have those de-escalator clauses in that contract. But it just seems like something that could have eventually worked out on their own, to me. I don't blame Roquan for going to the press. It's a bargaining chip that players have, and they should use every bargaining chip that they have. So I don't blame him, but it just seems like it was maybe a little premature, to me at least. So hopefully they get that figured out. I do wonder if the Bears were at a different point in their kind of timeline, if this deal would have been done already. If they were, trying to compete for a championship this year, I don't know if, and maybe, I know this is kind of just speculation on my part, but maybe Ryan Poles would have been a little bit more motivated to get this contract done. And because it's that kind of first year of a, they don't want to call it a rebuild, but that's what it is. They might be a little bit more hesitant to give out that money.
Absolutely. And I think because you do have a first-year GM who, while he's getting to know the roster yet, he hasn't seen them play a regular season game once. So my philosophy or thinking is, and this is why they haven't spent that much in free agency yet, and they're banking a lot of money for next year. Ryan Poles is going to see where this roster, what it looks like, where those gaps are. He's basically going to see it as this just mold of clay and mold it the way he needs to. So once the season ends, let's say like there's a bunch of gaps at offensive line and wide receiver, and maybe defensive line isn't as deep, or, just for example, he's going to then try to fill those gaps with free agency, spend the money he
Yeah.
needs to spend it. So I could see him being a little leery of, shelling out $22 million to an off the ball linebacker, a
Yeah.
position that's really not a premium in the NFL at this point. Instead of just waiting to see what the whole roster looks like after 1 year, and then again seeing where he needs to fill those gaps.
Yeah, and I think that the positional value is definitely coming into play here. I think I think they'll eventually get it done, and I think Roquan is worth it because I do think he's a step behind Shaq Leonard and Fred Warner. But I mean that's just kind of the way the contracts go in the NFL. Sometimes the third best player resets the market, and then it
Yep.
just kind of goes and goes. So I do think they'll get it done eventually, and I do think they'll give him Roquan kind of what he wants. And it probably is a little bit of an overpay, but that's just kind of the nature of the business. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to see how this unfolds over the next few weeks, and see, hopefully they can get something done, either whether it's a contract or a trade before week 1, because I just don't want the distractions anymore. I just want to focus on what's happening on the
Yep.
field. So we'll see about that. But I think we covered it at least pretty well. I don't want to. We could talk for 2 hours just on Roquan
Exactly.
Smith. So
Yeah.
I kind of just at this point, we're at a point where we just need to see how it progresses and just react accordingly. So I think that's a good stopping point. We'll move on. So Brendan, back to what we originally were going to talk about when I first asked you to come on. You were at training camp last week on Friday, and I believe you were supposed to go on Sunday too, but it got rained out, so that was unfortunate.
Yep. That was really sad.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm curious, just kind of your overall thoughts. I've obviously seen them on Twitter and everything, but just wanted to hear your thoughts on whatever you want to talk about. What was your number one takeaway from your day there?
Sure. So there's a few takeaways.
Yeah.
I think it is interesting. I've told people I went to one camp practice last year under Matt Nagy,
Okay.
and pretty much stood in the same spot right behind the end zone. And it was one of the easiest days that the Bears had. They were not. I don't think they were in full pads at that practice. They were like strictly doing end zone work. There was a lot of breaks. It was very like just it felt slow. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And then, of course, on Friday, I'm watching practice and I'm like, man, these guys are going, going, going. There's no breaks. And then, of course, after practice, you hear from like multiple players, yeah, this was the hardest practice we've had
Yeah.
in a long time. And I'm like, oh, okay. So it wasn't just me seeing all of
Yeah.
that. Um, Eberflus threw a lot at these guys when I was there. I mean, you're talking, going from individual drills to a little like, 3-on-3 action with an all-time cue, and then team drills back to individual drills. And then you saw scout team, which surprised the hell out of me. I was like,
Yeah.
why
That
are the
was
guys?
interesting.
Because you saw like these players wearing pennies, and I'm seeing it like I'm only seeing it on one side, and I'm
Mhm.
trying to figure it out. I'm like, is this actually a scout team? I'm like, I can't really put my finger on it. So just the fact that they're really trying to throw everything they can at these players and
Mhm.
see what they can handle, I was really impressed with it.
Yeah.
So um, I guess going right by like position groups, or offense, defense. Offensively, I wasn't really like totally wowed, and I think
Sure.
my co-host who went with me, Jack Wright from the Bear Down Chicago podcast, he had a great point. He's like, I didn't see any wow moments. We saw
Yeah.
like a deep ball to Velus Jones. There's a broken coverage, kind of like offsides play that Justin Fields found Equinemius St. Brown at. But aside from that, like there was a lot of just like hard nosed like runs and tight coverages and everything where passes were getting broken up. I thought Justin Fields was fine.
Mhm.
But we just didn't see any wow moments.
Yeah.
And I think like my biggest takeaway from the offense was in the red zone, because again, right behind him, I'm seeing everything right in front of me. Justin Fields had a knack for zeroing in on Darnell Mooney and Cole Kmet.
Interesting.
And it got to a point where it was kind of problematic because there were open wide receivers there. There was one play in particular Fields is rolling out, and N'Keal Harry's wide open right in front of us. He's open for at least like 2 to 3 actual seconds. And Fields is just looking, and he hits Darnell Mooney in front of him, who is just easily covered. And I'm like, okay, he's locking onto his guys a little bit. Same thing with Cole Kmet. Passes were getting batted down. They were well covered. I think the secondary looks really, really good in that aspect. But
Mhm.
I'd like, at least when I was there, I'm not sure,
Sure.
what it was like today during Family Fest specifically, but yeah, I just saw a little bit of a too much like relying on those two guys. I'd like him to
Yeah.
rely on a few more receivers. So,
Yeah,
um,
that's interesting that you say that because I actually just did kind of a breakdown of Justin Fields, and that was one of the things that I saw last year is that I couldn't say for certain, but it seemed like he was determining who he was going to throw to the ball to before the ball was snapped, and it was
mhm,
usually Mooney or Komet because those were his favorite targets, and then he wasn't really letting the play develop and reading the defenses. He was just throwing the ball to who he said he was going to throw to before the snap happened, and sometimes that worked, sometimes that guy was open and that's when he had
yeah.
those crazy good throws and everything like that. But a lot sometimes that ended up in an interception. So it's just interesting that to hear that from you. And when I was at Bears camp, I kind of saw to your first point you made this kind of the same thing where guys. The offense wasn't really that impressive. No wow plays, as you said.
Mhm,
I saw some wow plays in like the one-on-one drills, but when it
yeah.
was the team drill, especially on the second day I was there, defense was definitely locking them down and winning the day. So it's interesting to hear that from you as well.
Yeah, and I will say, like, I am impressed, especially with the DBs. I mean, it seems like every play or
Hmm.
every practice, Jaquan Brisker is finding a way to get his hands on a football.
Yeah.
The big highlight play I saw was a ball. Cole Kmet caught a ball. I think it was like maybe a 10 to 15 yard, like, curl pass or something. And he's going to the ground, and Jaquan Brisker punches it out like peanut punch. And I tweeted that, and of course, half my mentions. I'm not sure how you feel about this, but half of my mentions were like, "Oh, Cole Kmet, he can't catch anything," and I'm like, "No,
Yeah.
this was a legitimate catch. He had it, and this guy just made a hell of a play on the ball." So I'm really, really excited to see these young cornerbacks and safeties come together. I think they're going to be a really, really solid unit.
Yeah.
And even when I was there, like Kyler Gordon wasn't playing. Obviously, Thomas Graham was still out. Kendall
Hmm.
Vildor was out. So we saw a little bit more of Tavon Young and Lamar Jackson, a few of those like bottom of the depth chart kind of players. And
Yeah.
I was impressed with them. I think they do have a lot
Nice.
of depth there. I think they're being coached up really well. I like the drills that they're doing. Jalen Johnson, again, my buddy Jack, he got a really nice video of Johnson coming across the field to break up a pass, I think to Pringle.
Yeah.
So showing that closing speed. But yeah, so as much as like I'd like to see a little bit more from the offense, I am really, really excited for seeing what the defense has. And real
Yeah.
quickly to go back to Fields real quick.
Sure.
Um, I think he is reading through his progressions a little bit better. I was seeing
Okay.
that. I don't
Good.
know about you. I just think he's not necessarily trusting whether to pull the trigger or not to those like targets he's not as familiar with. And
Okay.
I am really excited that they're doing a lot more scramble drills. They're giving the
Hmm.
quarterbacks, even in individual drills, they're having them run up the sideline with blockers and trying to kind of get that feel. And they're
Yeah.
giving Fields the freedom to scramble out if he doesn't see anything, take the ball upfield, and trying to catch that delicate balance of, hey, we want you to throw from the pocket, but we're not going to limit your athleticism and your speed. If
Right.
you see something and you feel comfortable with it, go for it. So those were pretty much my big takeaways as a whole.
Yeah, that's all good to hear. I'm glad to hear that he was, going through progressions a little bit more because I didn't see that a whole lot when I was at training camp, but that was 2 days, and it's
Yeah.
sometimes you're far away, so it's good to see that you saw that. But going back to the defensive backs, that's something that I noticed as well. As you mentioned, Quan Brisker, I think is. I try not to be too like overhyped on guys in training camp, but I think Jaquan Brisker is actually going to be
Yeah.
pretty good because he was making plays all over the field. Pass breakups, forced fumbles, everything. Just always in the right spot too. So I think I was really impressed with him. I did see Kyler Gordon the couple days I was there. I was there before he got injured, and he made a few plays. He got beat a few times, but I thought he looked pretty good too. But it was nice to hear what you said about the guys lower on the depth chart who were standing out, because when I was there, I didn't really see much from those guys. But there's going to be injuries. Jalen Johnson, Keller Gordon, Jaquan Brisker might get Eddie Jackson might get injured from time at a certain point during the year. So you got to have that depth, and that's the position that I think we haven't had depth in the past. So I mean, I'm not a big Kindle Wilder fan, but I like him coming off the bench a lot more than I like him
Oh
starting. If
yeah.
he's thrust into the starting position, that's okay. And it's also interesting. I think Eberflus and Williams, that's something that they were always able to develop. Those defensive backs, like Kenny Moore from the Colts, was a nobody, late round draft pick or maybe even undrafted free agent. I can't remember. And now he's one of the best nickel cornerbacks in the league. So they've proven that they can develop those defensive backs. So hopefully that's kind of what we're seeing now with these guys, with Lamar Jackson and all those guys. So that would be nice if they're able to kind of turn that from a what was a perceived weakness at the start of the off season and even last year to maybe even a strength. That would be really great.
Yeah, isn't that nuts? I mean, just thinking back, and it is kind of hard to get wrapped up, like,
Yeah,
not overhyping guys or anything like that. I mean, but remembering how bad the secondary was at the end of last season, and now just
yeah,
being excited by all of the talent, and it's not
right,
just Brisker and Gordon; it's a hard hitting safety like Cruikshank.
yeah,
I'm really particularly high on Tavon Young. I think he's got something to
yeah,
prove as a nickel corner. So bringing all those guys in and then giving proper coaching to holdovers like Jalen Johnson and Kindle Vildor to a lesser extent, seeing
yeah,
all that gel. And then of course Eddie Jackson. I think we've seen him play really well with like a true strong safety, somebody like Brisker when he was playing with Adrian Amos. So
right,
just there is a really, really good amount of hope, I think, with that position group, and it's going to be
yeah.
really fun to see how they respond to actual like other opposing teams soon enough.
Right. Yeah, and I think that Eddie Jackson point is huge. He's one of the guys that I'm really excited to watch this year because, he hasn't played up to his expectations, no matter who you ask or how you cut it over the last couple of
Hmm.
years. But we have seen him play at a high level when he was playing with Adrian Amos. So now maybe hopefully Brisker can fill that role and he can get maybe he's not, an all pro safety who has 6 picks a year, but he can if he just gets back to a solid starter, maybe even above average starter, that would be a huge game changer for the Bears. So
If he just gets an interception,
just
we
one or just
just a
one.
couple. I mean, he
Just
hasn't had
or
any in 2 years.
at least stop missing tackles.
Yeah.
Let's keep the bar really low and just work our way up from there. So yeah, but that would definitely be a welcomed sight again. Um, I'm curious, just before we move on from training camp, on the offensive line, kind of who was working with the first team the day you were there? Because I know there's been a lot of rotations on who's playing, and maybe you don't remember, and that's perfectly fine. But kind of who was working with the first teams? Was it Schofield and Reef, or were the young guys getting a shot at that point?
Thankfully, I do remember.
Okay.
It was Braxton Jones took every rep at left tackle. I remember that.
Yeah.
Whitehair was left guard. Mustafer was center.
Mhm.
At right guard was Schofield. And then right tackle was Reef, but Borum was kind of mixing in there a little bit. And
Yeah.
obviously, so it feels like a lifetime ago just because so much has happened. But
Yeah.
that was before Teven Jenkins came back. It was the day
Sure.
before he returned to practice. Um, they started working Larry Borum in at left tackle, I believe, earlier today at Family Fest,
Yeah.
trying to give some different combinations. But um, yeah, it really, really seems like Braxton Jones is the guy at left tackle, and
Yeah.
he was solid. Like he was really, really solid when I saw him. Like,
Mhm.
granted, Robert Quinn wasn't practicing, so he wasn't going up
Yeah.
against like the best of the best, but he held his own against guys like Travis Gibson and Al Qaedi Muhammad. So you got to be happy with that, especially for a rookie of, coming from a smaller school like he did.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. When I was there, it was Braxton Jones was getting starting reps at left tackle, but Riley Reef was like just signed. So Reef was working with
Okay.
at left tackle, kind of rotating in at left tackle. So it's interesting that that's kind of progressed with that instead of, them rotating that Jones is now getting all the reps at left tackle. And he did look pretty good. And again, Robert Quinn wasn't playing when I was there either, but he did look decent based on who he was going up against. But now it's interesting that it seems like he's only working at right tackle, not even kind of working at both. So I'm wondering. I just it's just interesting because I know you got Reef and Borum and now Jenkins at right tackle, but no one's really cross training at left tackle either. So I'm if they think Braxton Jones is a starter, I'm fine with that. They know a lot more than I do. But I'm just curious what happens if Braxton Jones gets injured. I would assume you would move Reef over to left tackle, or I don't know, maybe I don't know if Borum's getting any starts there or reps there or not. But it'll be interesting to see what would they do if that did happen.
Yeah, that's a good question. And fortunately, both Reef and Borum have experience at left tackle. Obviously, Reef has a lot
Yeah,
more experience than Borum does. So you are okay in a pinch there. And to be
right.
honest, when Reef was signed, I thought he was going to be competing for left tackle
Same.
to
I thought he
basically.
was going to be handed the left tackle job, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, especially for the amount of money that he could potentially earn. Now he's only
Right.
making a base salary of I think like 3.5 or 4.5 million.
Yeah.
But if he hits a ton of escalators, he'll get to like 12 million a year, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Something like that.
yeah, but still, it is kind of interesting. They really like what they've seen from Jones.
Hmm.
Now you put Reef with Borum at right tackle, and of course, then Teven Jenkins comes along, and honestly, who really knows what's happening there? My best guess is they will eventually trade him, and they're just going to try to
You think
get him
so?
those reps to show that he's actually healthy. Yeah, because there's too much smoke. There's
Yeah.
really, really too much smoke. And I know that he came out and said I wasn't clashing with coaches. And I think that's probably accurate. I think some of that may have been taken out of context.
Hmm.
Perhaps they just don't necessarily see eye to eye for one reason or another. But why has he missed so much time? There has been multiple rumors coming out and
Yeah.
reports from both national and local media saying that the Bears are fielding calls and even actively making calls to try to move him.
Hmm.
It just kind of seems like even if he is the most talented lineman on the team, which I think you absolutely can make an argument for, there just doesn't seem to be a place for him. They really seem to
Yeah.
like Borum and Reef more than anything. And even in OTAs, like he wasn't getting those first team reps. It's been a long time since he's actually been considered a first team starting tackle. So
Yeah.
I was telling I forget who I was talking to earlier, but I just really seems like one of those weird mysteries that we haven't seen before as Bears
Yeah.
fans, like with this team. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I do know what you mean, and it's interesting that you said that you think he's going to be traded because I actually think the same thing. Even though I personally wouldn't trade him because, like you said, I do think he's the most talented tackle on the team, so I wouldn't trade him. But obviously, the Bears see him every day. They know his work ethic and everything like that, and we don't know why he's been out was out for those first 7 days. But I do think it did seem kind of like with this. I was excited when he came back when there was pictures of him in practice, and
Mhm.
then I was less excited when I heard his press conference because it didn't seem like a guy who actually really wanted to be there. And I do think it's exactly what you said, whereas they were trying to trade him, but no one was going to trade for a guy who hasn't been practicing and all that stuff, and maybe has a bad attitude. Again, that's speculation. We don't know exactly
Yeah.
what happened. So I think they were like, listen, if you come back practice, we'll get you some reps, and then it'll be a lot easier to trade you and fulfill your wish of being traded than it is if you're not practicing and not there. So I think that's kind of what it sounded like to me. Again, speculation, but that's kind of
Yeah.
just me connecting dots.
I think he does to an extent want to be here. But I use this comparison, and I'm sure like anybody can relate who has a job. I mean, let's say you join or you get hired at a company, and the department, the hiring manager, all of that are people that you really vibed with, you connected with. Hey, I want to be here because these people are here. They see something in me. I see that in them, whatever. And then a little bit later, there's turnover. Either they get all fired or they leave, one reason or another. And then a new department head comes in, they bring in their own people, and suddenly you're working for people that you weren't necessarily planning on working for. And
Yeah.
it may not be hostile, for example, but maybe you just don't see eye to eye on certain things. You're just not vibing the way that you would have with the other department head or something. And, it's just for one reason or another, it's not working. And I've been in a situation like that
Yeah.
in my professional career. So it could be something like that where this regime didn't draft Jenkins. they aren't able to connect with him for one reason or another. Maybe it's the competition factor because really nobody is promised a starting spot on this team. I love that
Yeah,
about Matt Eberflus.
same.
And there's just a gap in trying to connect with him. And maybe he's coming back trying to make the best out of a situation, but he also knows, hey, if I go out, if I do my job, if I'm healthy, something's going to happen, whether it's me earning that starting position at some point with the Chicago Bears or them finding a trade partner to move me out and me having a chance to reset my career with a new team that believes in me. So
Yeah,
that's kind of how I see it. But again, you're right. We don't know. They're
we don't
so
know.
tight-lipped about everything with it. It's so hard to guess.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know. So again, we could speculate for hours, but it just kind of sucks that we have all these different things that Roquan and Teven Jenkins this offseason that we don't really know what's going on, and we're kind of just sitting here speculating. And it would be in an ideal world, we would, Roquan Smith would be under contract and practicing, and Teven Jenkins would have been in here from day one.
Yep.
So it just seems like I don't really blame Ryan Poles. I'm willing to give Ryan Poles a year before I start calling for his head. I just think he's had some bad luck as a first year GM, just a lot of stuff that he probably didn't realize he had to deal with. So, but yeah, again, I'm going to give him a year before I start really, saying it's his fault or anything like that. So I think he's just had some bad luck.
Yeah,
Um,
same.
all right. I think we covered training camp. So let's just, quickly kind of this weekend we have our first preseason game, so we finally get to stop watching the Bears versus the Bears because as you said, you get a play where someone knocks the ball out of Cole Kmet's hands and you have half the fan base saying, "See, Cole Kmet sucks," and the other half that uh, fan base saying, "See, our defense is so good," and it's just like I just want to watch the Bears play against someone who's not the Bears. So we finally get that this weekend, Saturday, August 13th, against the
Hmm.
Chiefs. I believe it's a noon game. So I'm just curious, who are you gonna be looking out for? Is it are you gonna be watching the play designs, or are you gonna be watching the specific players? I do think it's a good thing that the Bears have said that they're going to be playing their starters. This is a team that needs reps together. So I'm happy that they're not, sitting their guys, and I hope Justin Fields gets reps in all three preseason games. So curious, just what your thoughts on what you're going to be watching this weekend.
That's a hard question because I feel like I want to watch everything. I really
I
do.
know,
It's
yeah,
like from Justin Fields to the offensive line combinations. I know we know like Fields is going to be playing a certain amount of series. I'm going to guess like
yeah,
3 to 4, maybe max. Um, but then how long does the starting offensive line play? Who is that starting offensive line going to be? I think it is going to be Jones, Whitehair, Mustipher at this point because Patrick's hurt, Schofield, and then Reef to start out.
right.
But how long do they play? Are they going to mess with that combination during a
Mhm.
game and kind of pull Reef for Borum, for example? Which wide receivers are going to gel with Justin Fields now that N'Keal Harry's out, Byron Pringle's out, Byron Pringle's out. Did I say that already?
Byron
Yeah, I said
Pringle, N'Keal
Bayless
Harry, yeah,
Jones. Yeah,
Bayless Jones,
sorry.
yeah. You're
That
good.
was the
You're
other
good.
one I was looking for. Yeah, so Pringle Jones is if he's gonna play Harry. David Moore just got carted off. Granted, he was kind of lower on the
Yeah,
depth chart, but who are the other wide receivers catching passes from Justin Fields going to be besides Darnell Mooney and Cole Kmet?
yeah,
Um, Establishing that connection is going to be really, really important. So, um, obviously, those combinations. I don't think Luke Getsy's gonna like throw the kitchen sink out and try to show
yeah.
too much. I do think it's
Sure.
interesting, of course, this being the great homecoming of Matt Nagy coming back to Soldier Field.
That's
I
right. I didn't think of
remember
that.
I remember for the first preseason game, he was dialing up different coverages to like get or different looks to get Justin Fields comfortable. He had that fake play where Fields was able to throw it to Jesse James for the touchdown. You got to be thinking, well, that's the most game planning he's done, and that was for a preseason game. So I think we're going
Yeah,
to see the opposite of that. Probably
yeah,
some safe plays here, but and then for the defense going up against Kansas City's offense, I know it's going to be dumbed down for the preseason, but still they've got talented playmakers on their offensive side. How do
yeah.
they stack up? If Kyler Gordon's going to play, how is he going to look against the receivers? Of course, Brisker. What's that linebacker group going to look like? Obviously, Roquan's not playing. I'm curious as to what you think. When I was there, I didn't see much of Nicholas Morrow. I didn't see too much of Matthew Adams. The linebackers just kind of seem to be there and not making too many plays. So is that going to be a concern on defense? Is that going to be like potentially an issue to come if Roquan doesn't play? So those are kind of a few things. But again, it's so hard because I want to see literally anything and everything that the Bears give me from player 1 to player like 90 on the roster.
I mean, I'm right there with you. That was a very loaded question because you could have gone a lot of different directions there. So,
and I did.
But and you did, and that's perfect. That's perfect. So let's start at the base. So yeah, Justin Fields, obviously, I'm excited to see, but like you said, I don't know if they're not gonna have anything too complicated for him out there. And like it said, it might even be 2, 3, 4 series max. But the offensive line definitely want to look at just basically how they line up. I want to see Braxton Jones against a real defender who's not his teammate. So see kind of if they're going to make him the starting off left tackle, I want to see how he holds up in training camp. But then it's interesting is because Braxton Jones might play more than 4 series. He might play a little bit more, but Riley Reef isn't going to play 4 series. He might only play 2 series. So it'll be interesting who's the first guys off the bench to fill in for those guys, because or maybe they all play 4 series. I don't know, but is it Borum comes off the bench first? Does Mustipher play at right guard because that might be where he has to play when the season starts, once Lucas Patrick is back? Kind of all that stuff, just kind of who's lining up where. I think that's really what you get more than how guys look or like the scheme wise. You're not going to see a whole lot there, but just where guys are lining up. And then the defensive side of the ball, you asked about the linebackers. When I was there, I actually did see a good amount of Nicholas Morrow. I thought he was moving really well. The athleticism is clearly there, but it's also extremely difficult to judge linebackers in a practice where you can't tackle. I mean, that's their like number one job. It's impossible to judge a linebacker, I feel like. So yeah, those like it's a little bit easier to judge wide receivers and corners when they're doing one-on-ones. They have a set objective and what it is, and you can kind of tell who's winning and who's losing. But with the linebackers, you can't really tell. So them and like defensive line and offensive line, I think those are going to be the positions that I really want to watch, because you'll be able to actually see them going sideline to sideline, see them covering tight ends, see them actually making tackles. It's something. This will be the first time that we see it, so definitely going to be looking out for that. And then I want to see the young guys, Jaquan Brisker, Kyler Gordon. Again, well, I don't know if Kyler Gordon's going to be playing, but Jaquan Brisker should be. It'll be interesting to see how long Gordon's out, because we're getting to the point where he's been out for 5 days now, 5-6 days.
Yeah, and he had issues in minicamp too.
So
it's starting to kind of get a little bit worrisome. Like, is this going to be a lingering issue?
Right. So yeah, I would guess that just based on how little he's played, he probably, even if he's healthy, probably won't play this weekend. But hopefully he can, play the next 2 preseason games and get in the swing of things, because we're really relying on him on being that quarterback. Everyone's pretty much locked him into that cornerback 2 spot. So if he's out any longer, that could be an issue. But yeah, just kind of I'll be watching everyone. So it's hard to narrow it down exactly what you want to look at. So, but anyways, it's just excited to watch a Bears game again. It feels like it's been forever, because even towards the end of last year, I was pretty checked out at the last couple of games, especially when Fields wasn't playing. I was like, do I really want to watch Andy Dalton, throw the ball to guys who suck for 4 hours? I mean, I did, but I was pretty checked out.
I know, isn't it? It's so funny. I think about this every year, especially when the Bears are bad. Like, we get so hyped up for the first preseason game, and then if the Bears are bad, week 16, 17 come, you're like, do I really want to give this team 3 hours of my time just to see what I know is going to be a bad product? But you know what? This is training camp. This is summer. This is when hope springs eternal with the Bears, and you gotta love it.
Every team could go 19-0 or 20-0 at this point, so who knows?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we did a good job covering everything. Brendan, I want to thank you again for coming on. This was awesome. I'll definitely ask you back at some point. Hopefully you'll come back on. I do want to say one thing, because I forgot to mention this when I was introducing you, but I saw on Twitter before I hopped on that you've committed that if you get to 3,500 followers, you're going to chug the new Sonic Pickle Slushie. Was that true? Was that you?
That is true. That's me. There was no planning behind this. I literally just saw somebody post something about this. this pickle slushy and there's like a pickle burger too, but I'm more interested in the slushy. And
Okay.
I love pickles, but this is
Okay.
like, this seems
Yeah,
like a
that's
monstrosity to me.
yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I want to try this just for the, to see how bad it is, but I have to put some incentive on it. And I just looked at my Twitter followers. I'm like at 3,300 something. And I'm like, you know
Yeah.
what? If I can, they're having it until the end of August. So I was like, if I can get to 3,500 followers, I'm going to do it.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
well, everyone follow Brendan. Make sure you come to 3,500 followers. So I don't know why I want to see you chug a pickle slushy, but I kind of do. So,
yeah,
yeah, let's get you to 3,500. And again, thanks for coming on, and we'll talk to you again soon.
sounds good, man. Thank you so much.